I've got to confess, guys, I'm a little bit disappointed in Amazon Game Studios, and there's two main reasons why. Number one is the leaderboards themselves, and number two is the logic of just launching the leaderboards on the PTR. Let me explain and show you. Here we are on the PTR, and you might be thinking, what is in this PTR? Well, let me tell you, or indeed, let me show you. If I go into modes and we go into leaderboards, this is literally pretty much everything that's in the PTR. There's a few slight changes, and indeed, some of you will be like, didn't we see this already back in November, December? Yes, we did, but they have made some tweaks, okay? The tweaks look fine. The leaderboards, in a sense, look fine. I do have some concerns about the leaderboards, which I'm going to talk about in this video, but what is not in this PTR is all of the combat changes, the influence change, the spells being different colors. Pretty much none of that is in this. In fact, what is in this is these patch notes. So there's a couple of fixes for a couple of things, like the Purity of Light staff perk, an ability where the hatchet you could go faster than you should be able to, some items that were showing that you could equip them when you couldn't equip them, whatever, right? This is it. These patch notes are very minor. There's not too much in them. And the reason for me that this is a problem is that we've had two things. One, we had this Q&A where they talked about the upcoming changes to balance and stuff like that. And 9 days ago, we actually had this blog where they talked about the combat balance changes as well. We had all of that. And then the first PTR that they dropped is actually just the leaderboards. I don't think they've even spoke about leaderboards since the last Q&A, or at least the dev update in December. It was quite a while ago. What I'm saying here is that they basically built up our expectations for it to be the combat changes and maybe the influence changes, and then we've been effectively sort of like rug pulled, and they've given us the leaderboard. Now, they did say in the PTR launch update yesterday that it was just going to be leaderboards and never included anything else, but there were some people who was like, hey, seems a bit weird to just do that, right? Lo and behold, they just did the leaderboards. Now, I don't know if the leaderboards themselves really need to be split out from the combat changes. It sort of feels to me that they could have put them all together. Yes, they probably want to make sure the leaderboards are working correctly and actually checking what they want them to check, but I think for the average person who's just following this game, it just looks a little bit weird. You got us all excited about combat changes and balance changes and stuff like that, and then you go ahead and not deliver any of that. You don't tell us any about that. You just say it's going to come in the future. And we do know it's going to come in the future. They're obviously not going to do it. More information is coming next week about the PTR, and that's probably when we'll get the combat changes, right? I suspect they'll only wait a week. I don't think they're going to wait 2. And you can see here that they're actually going to try and incentivize people to actually play on the PTR, because right now there's very little reason to, apart from really wanting the game to succeed. Your super fans will try it, but beyond that, who's going to bother? So all the combat changes and stuff like that will come to the PTR. I just think logically the marketing, and it might not even be an intentional marketing thing, it's just they've sort of screwed the pooch a little bit, right? You talked about combat changes, you got everybody talking about combat changes, and then you don't deliver the combat changes, you deliver leaderboards, which are a feature that we've sort of already seen in the past. It's just not very interesting, basically, because we already know what we're going to get. I was just streaming this, and a lot of people's like, hey, where are the combat changes? And I'm like, well, there aren't any. Hey, can you show me the different colored abilities? No, because it's not in the game. Hey, what's the changes to Bane's? Well, I can't show you any of that because we don't have it. It's just been a bit underwhelming. They didn't lie to us. It's just a confusing situation where we thought we were going to get one thing because logically you built it up, and then they didn't deliver that thing. Which is fine. They're doing their own thing. I'm not necessarily blaming anybody working on the team. It's just more that I don't necessarily think they thought that through properly. It just seems a little bit weird. Okay, let's move on. Now, I want to talk about the leaderboards themselves because a couple of things I have a problem with. Let's check the mutated expeditions and see what you get for like participating here. This is the same as we've seen before. There is a weekly only set of rewards. It makes sense that it's weekly because they obviously rotate, and there's 2 different scores. There's the maximum score and the clear time. So keep that in mind. They basically want to reward speedrunners. And then let me just jump into player versus player for a second, and let me jump into Outpost Rush. So if I click Outpost Rush, you'll see that you get a reward for your score. Now this score appears to be your top score for a match in a quarter. Now, if I can change this to monthly, but you don't get a reward, and if I change it to weekly, you also don't get a reward. Well, you don't get a reward because it doesn't even track it in a weekly basis, right? But if I go back to quarterly, your score, and I'm presuming it's your total score, right? Because it says it's the top score you received in a match. There's only been 1 Outpost Rush on the server right now, so it's a little bit hard to confirm this, but that's how you get your points. Now, this is very similar for the faction war. On an individual basis, you get your reward for your highest score in a war. Not your total score in all of your wars, your highest score. Now, why do I have a bit of a problem with that? Because let's think about what this rewards. In Mutated Expeditions, it rewards speedrunners, which is fine. Obviously, you are going to be getting speedrunning. And in Wars and Outpost Rush, you're basically rewarding stat padders. Those are two things that I don't think the game necessarily needed more of. As I said, it was going to be difficult to do anything else for mutated expeditions, but yeah, I just think it's a bit weird to reward that, especially for PvP. Now, there is some stuff when it comes to wars, like for example, you can check on a faction basis who's had the most governing amount of days. That's all pretty interesting. Who's won the most amount of wars in your factions. You can check on a company basis who's had the most governing streak. All this kind of stuff. I actually really like this. Makes sense that there's no real rewards behind them. For your character though, then the main thing that you get is your score in war, but you will also see your wins, you'll see your kill death ratio, you'll see your heals, all totaled up. That's perfectly fine, right? Still think it's a bit weird. Now, for some of these, the numbers have changed, like it's top 10 and top 50 here, but I think on one it's top 5 and top 25, but that's interesting. But the faction war, I think that sort of makes sense. Player versus player, there's a couple of different categories. For the open world PvP, you have the control points captured, like that's just going to be who captures the most forts. You do get a reward for the influence earned. You see me, I'm topping this one because I'm an absolute beast. I'm just messing about. By the way, even though it sort of shows like I have these, it says I don't own this item. The symbol becomes unlocked, like there is no symbol, but I can't like preview it or anything like that, and I don't think these will be the final skins anyway. I think they're sort of all the same sort of skins, so you can ignore that for now. Showed you who's got the most kills in the open world. These are fun. Some of these are fun. This influence earned one, it's quarterly. It doesn't exist for monthly. Like if I click it, it's just sort of grayed out, but it does exist for weekly, interestingly, but you don't get a reward. Don't quite know why you wouldn't just show that for monthly as well, but it is what it is. Outpost rushes we went through, that is literally just your score. You do get to see your wins and your player kills and all this kind of good stuff. This guy had a massive kill death ratio. Perfect. Fine, great. Who killed the most NPCs? Who had the most resources? These are all interesting to track. I'm all okay with these. I think these make perfect sense. Just realized I may have been blocking some of the shots, but I don't think it really mattered too much. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is arena. I don't know why I said it so weirdly. I want to talk about arenas, right? So it does show some cool stuff. It shows wins. Interestingly, it does show the win-loss ratio, which is sort of like a ranking. It's not, because there's no matchmaking, like there is no MMR or ELO. Anybody can just be matched with anybody, so it's not really a fair reflection. But it's interesting to see that effectively the people who have the best win-loss ratio in arenas, they will probably be the best players, right? On average, it makes sense. No reward for this one though, but that's fine. I'm happy with that. And then the last one to have a look at is trade skills. Now with trade skills, there are no rewards for quarterly and there are no rewards for monthly either. But it's basically who can craft the most amount of legendaries for all of them except fishing, because fishing, I think it's who can catch the most amount of legendaries. Be interesting to see if bots end up showing up there. We'll have to wait and see. This is another one. It's interesting to see, but makes sense. There's nothing going to be too interesting behind this because it's just gambling at the end of the day for crafting. So my point with leaderboards is that they're not that interesting. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have them. I'm not saying they shouldn't have made them at all, but I just don't think they're all that interesting and all that important for most of the player base. We basically have speedrunners who are going to continue to be the best speedrunners, probably because they're the people who already do it now. It's not necessarily going to encourage more people to do it, I don't think. And then we have stat padders in both wars and PvP. There is actually a couple of stuff, interestingly, in PvE. For example, in invasions, it's whoever gets the highest score. There appears to be one for the trials as well. I'm not 100% sure what this is. I don't know if it's going to be score. It doesn't imply score. So maybe it's who just does the most of them, which is fine. Crack on if you want to farm them. That's all right. And for corruption breaches, it's whoever has the highest score. You earn 1 point for each point of XP that a corruption breach is worth. So this is a little bit interesting. They basically boil down into two main categories. Most of them are who can do the most amount of things, either the most amount of trials or the most amount of corruption breaches. The next thing that it boils down to is who can score the most amount of points in whatever activity, either outpost rush or war. And then the next activity is basically who can do the mutations the quickest or the fastest with the best score. That's literally the conditions, right? Personally, what I'm saying is I think the leaderboards are going to be interesting for some players, but I think for the majority of players, we're never going to make it to the top 5, top 25, top 50. It is what it is. A bit of me now thinks that the cooldown changes to transferring is actually because of the leaderboards. It now means that you can't transfer to a dead server, quickly like get all of the influence push or whatever you want to get up, and then transfer back. You can do it, but it's going to be a round trip of 60 days, and people are not maybe going to want to do that. So I think maybe I'm just like being a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but I think that makes sense. So yeah, I have two main problems. One, the leaderboards just being questionable value, I think, to the majority of players. Some of it will be interesting, some of it is just effectively glorified achievements. I'm happy we have it, but I just don't think it's all that important. And then secondly, I just don't get the timing from AGS. Why talk about all the balance changes and then not give us the balance changes? I just sort of feel like that. it just seems a bit weird. It's not the most painful thing in the world, but a lot of people are just disappointed right now in New World in general, and then doing these kind of things just makes you look bad for no real reason. Maybe there is a reason, but that reason isn't communicated, so it looks like no real reason. I'll be here next week, hopefully when we get the balance changes and all that kind of good stuff, so if you want to see that, make sure you subscribe. Otherwise, have a most beautiful day. Consider becoming a YouTube member or follow me on Twitch. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.